Yoku. Okay. I guess we are good to go. Are we all good to go?
Yeah.
All right, welcome back. We've been having good conversations, I think. I hope you like. And we have been speaking about how to make public choices. But we have, in a way, I mean, we haven't really talked about the public nature of these choices that much, except to say that we imagine there's some minister in the center who's making the choices, but the fact that these are choices for a community, a nation, it really hasn't in a way, been very important in our discussion. The fact that there are multiple people who will be impacted. We're going to now start shifting to take in the social nature of these decisions more. What we've one thing we have talked about is externalities, that one production type of it can actually interfere with another type of production. So I could go and try to find who's making this noise and pay them to shut up for the next hour and a half, but maybe they'll... Of course, this creates perverse incentives, because then they would say, aha, and they would come at 9 o'clock every morning and start making more and more noise, knowing that I will pay them to shut up. Okay, can you, I actually find it distracting, but I will continue, and I hope you will, we shall soldier on. I hope everyone online is... For once, it's really an advantage to be online, because you don't have to listen to What?
But you don't hear anything.
You don't hear anything? Okay. All right. So we've got... I'm sensitive to this kind of noise, so okay. So we've supposed what we've been doing. There was some French writer who, maybe it was Voltaire, who said he had spoken prose his whole life without realizing it. That was meant to be a joke. The prose is what one writes it. We have been discussing social welfare functions without realizing it. So what we've been talking about is how a society, or a bunch of people together, rank options. So social welfare, and what we've been focusing on is one particular type or class of social welfare function based on social cost-benefit analysis. We rank options according to how much economic surplus they generate. And so it acts, the idea is social welfare function acts for a society like a utility function acts for an individual. It gives you a preference ranking. And so you can, if you, and I'm going to, by the way, encourage Pini to, I don't know if you were just stretching or if you had, okay. Because we're also treading on ground that Pini knows a lot about. Just think of it as we have to have some way of ranking options. Just like a utility function does for individual, a social welfare function does for a community. We've talked in detail about one way of doing this, which is to derive, in effect, the economic surplus generated by a project or an action or a program, and then adding up those surpluses to get an aggregate number and calling that, using that to create the preference order. This is not the only way to do this. There are other ways you can do this. You can, for example, you have systems of voting. You can, yes?
Now I do know.
Okay.
So, just a quick comment that you're talking about this in the context of economic theory, but there are very related other areas that deal with something very similar, like political science, the theory of democracy. You know, voting is a way for a group of people to make decisions together. So this kind of problem about aggregating the preferences, or if you like, the ideas of many individuals, is very big topic in political philosophy in the context of democracy. And there is a whole study of voting procedures that can get very technical. It's very related to social decision making. And then there are, the whole social sciences about how groups make decisions together. So these fields are all related in interesting ways. That's what I want to say.
Indeed they are, thank you. But I do want to note that not every way of coming up with by which a community or a society comes up with a decision is, okay, I think this is true. Not every way that a community or a society could come up with a decision constitutes, in effect, a social welfare function. That is, the social welfare, I'll put a definition on the board and we'll investigate this question. So, I'm going to use the one I'm being lazy, so I'm using the one from Wikipedia, which they're usually pretty good for these technical things. If you want to know something like, is Joe Biden a good president? Wikipedia is not your go-to source. But if you want to know about what the definition of a technical term, I find them generally quite reliable. So let's say we have, let's call them, following the notation in Wikipedia, A1 through AN. Let's start over. Let's suppose we have a community, a society with members indexed by n equals 1 to up to big N. Let A sub n denote the preferences of community member n. So to say this, we have already made a substantive assertion that each member of the community has a set of preferences. So Pini discussed yesterday some of the reasons to have a little wariness about that. This is not a innocent, simple assumption to say that an individual has a set of preferences that order that give order to their decisions, and from which you can, in most cases, derive a utility function.
Okay, I was not raising my hand.
Oh, you were ready? Oh, okay. But go ahead.
So, if you want mathematical precision,
which we do.
Set of preferences. What is a set of preferences? Really, in this context, the assumption AK is a single preference ranking. So there is another assumption behind this, is that there is a set of options, a finite, fixed, known to all, shared by all, set of options, which is an assumption.
Yes.
Maybe I don't know what the thing is, okay? But it's an assumption. And then for those options, every member has a single ranking of preferences. Like A is better than B, B is better than this, and so on. So So that's the precise way of talking about it, I think. And then the point about the assumption here, this is mathematical. Let A, it looks very innocent. They do this in mathematics all the time. They write let A, and then they don't tell you what are the assumptions behind this that make this definition possible or sensible. So the assumption is a single preference ranking, which essentially is like saying I have a single way of evaluating everything, or maybe I have many ways of evaluating, but they all result in the same rank. That's the big assumption.
Yeah. So we're in a world in which there are. So we imagine a community of individuals that have a particular type. This is a community of individuals who make decisions in the kind of way that we've been talking about. That they make choices driven by some preference ranking. And that isn't, we've noted there are other models of human decision-making that don't correspond to this. But it's a big class of models that do have this. So we suppose this, and actually I'm going to do this two different ways. So so now I'm going to take the risk of stepping away. I'm just going to write on the board, and that's because talking and writing and thinking and having this all at once is too much for me, so I'm just going to write on the board, okay? So hold your question. All right, I'm going to instead call this, we suppose they have a utility function. It's possible to have a preference ranking that cannot be represented by a utility function, but those are kind of pathological cases, so we don't worry about them. So we'll just understand that this is referring to preferences, and we're not trying to be precise mathematically. So we have states or outcomes in some big spaces of options X. We say that let's say, for example, so XA and XB are a couple of possible outcomes. Like one outcome is the state of the world in which we have a health clinic, and another one is a state of the world in which we have a better highway, or something, okay? And this, we say, this means individual, let's call them agents. Agent N, weekly refers A to XA to XB. Yes? This is a definition for this notation. That's this definition, we're defining this thing. This just means is preferred to. So it's like is greater than, only it's talking about, instead of talking about numbers, one's bigger than the other, it's talking about preference rankings, one is preferred to another. Okay?
Yeah, first line, XA, XB is part of the set.
So yeah, there's this big set about, this is all the possible ways we could organize society. This is all the possible states of the world. All the possible outcomes. More health clinics, more statues, more libraries, more bread, more circuses, or less. So think of one point in this space as a vector that describes everything that's going on in the world, or maybe everything that's going on that, within some, one point in this space is a state of society. And two different points are two different possible states of society that we are comparing. All right, and we will write, and to say that these are preference rankings or utility functions, to say that this holds if and only if A is greater than or equal to X. So this is one state of the world in which we've invested in a health clinic. We've taken the same budget and we bought a health clinic. This is another state of the world. We took that same budget and we bought a better highway. And agent N likes the health clinic more than the highway. And therefore assigns a higher utility to the state of the world with the health clinic than the state of the world with the highway. Okay, so this is just a formalism for this is, in a way, this should be familiar because these are just utility functions. We've seen utility functions before. This corresponds to those, for an individual agent, they've got their preference ranking, which can be represented by ISO utility curves. And if you imagine, this is not just two dimensions with apples and oranges, but it's a very high dimensional space, and each point is corresponds, and so this is our big high dimensional X. And we could have, for this agent, this point is XA. Then for this agent, XA puts them on a higher utility than XB. Okay, so if they were making this if they were making an individual decision, they were just choosing out of their own budget for their own consumption, then if their budget would allow if their budget allowed them to get up here, then they would choose XA in preference to XB. Right?
So XA and XB, it's high-dimensional vectors.
Yeah, each one is a high-dimensional vector. We can imagine, for the purpose of this example, let's suppose all the other dimensions are the same, and we're only the only thing that we're choosing between then is between healthcare and highways or something. This involves more healthcare, and this involves more highways. And this state of the world, because it involves more healthcare, it puts them on there. Okay. All right, now, but let's suppose, so far this is also good. Now we're going to be in a situation where well, usually, let's say usually, it's not strictly necessary for this, for the formalism, but let's say what we have in mind is that somehow these have to be public decisions. That is, everyone, you know, you don't have your own personal Hrushchevik street. Everyone uses the same Hrushchevik street. Everyone consumes the same monuments. Everyone is, you know, so there's this technical feature of the decision that means that we all end up consuming the same amount of it. Now, that's not a situation, so this formalism applies to more situations than that. You could imagine that you have for example, like, let's say you have wartime rationing for food. Everyone gets their individual food allotment, and they consume it individually, but nonetheless there's a social decision about how that's allocated. So it's not necessarily that everyone must be consuming the same amount of the thing. Therefore, we're not, which is, there's a, they're not, in the jargon, these are not necessarily public goods, things that are jointly, or such that we're all consuming the same amount, but that's more often what we have in mind. Those are more often the kinds of cases where you have to think about everyone deciding together, right? Because usually if you're talking about things where you each decide individually, you don't really have to think so much about the social aspect of it. But yeah, anyway, you get the point, right? Okay. Now, what is a social welfare function? Well, abstractly, and I'm hoping I'm not going to screw this up, is, well, you can think of it as just another preference ranking. So it's a function W from the state of options. Do you know this notation? We're defining a function W that maps the state of all options to, let's say, real numbers or something, some subset of the real numbers. So and the idea is that if this holds true, then society prefers this option to this option. So this is a set of preferences for society. All right? Now, if this, and then the questions, the kinds of questions that we will then ask is, what's the relationship between this thing and all of these things? How do we aggregate these individual preferences into some social preference ranking? We could just say, we don't care what anybody wants. We'll have a random number generator, and that'll be our social preference ranking. That would meet a formal definition of a social welfare function. It would be insane. You would be having 3,000-foot statues that nobody wants, and nobody wants to pay for, but sorry, the ranking says we have to. A coherent, sensible set of welfare rankings for society will have some kind of resonant, meaningful, sensible relationship to what the individuals in society want. Now, so how... So there's a whole So how can you get from these individual rankings to some social ranking? This is, in fact, what we've been asking the whole course. How do you, given some set of options, these are all the different X's, how do you rank them, and how do you do so in a way that is in some way at least sensibly aligned with what is good for society, which may or may not be, let's say, what is good for society, it's probably got something to do with what people individually want. But that's an open kind of question, okay? You can, let's suppose, we've been operating in a world where we imagine that what individuals want for themselves is what they prefer, is what they choose, is what is good for them, is what is good. That these all mean the same thing. We've noted some difficulties with this model of the world in our mind. One of which is, what if everybody individually wants heroin and pornography? And that's what they, is that good? Are we, is anyone to judge that this is somehow not the good? If this is what individuals want, should there be a ministry of heroin that is dedicated to giving people more of what they want and making sure that heroin is affordable and that production is not disrupted, because that's what people want. Well, if you really bought into the model that what people buy, what people consume, how they transact, really tells you what they want and what is really fundamentally good for them, and it is wrong of you to judge otherwise, then there should be a ministry of heroin production and distribution. Maybe making sure that those who are too drugged out that they can no longer leave the house, we can have home deliveries for them to make sure that they're taken care of. Ilya, you had a question a while ago, which I forgot about.
It was a technical detail about mathematical representation of preference, but now it's clear.
It's clear, okay.
But why can't you just really some sort of filter this necessary access? For example, we throw away heroin access, yes?
Well, no, it's assumed there's a heroin axis that comes out of the blackboard. Yeah?
Yes, okay, and we just as policymakers can take health highways and then just aggregate for each one of individuals and project this for the whole society.
Excellent question. Please hold that, because that's what errors and possibility theorem is all about. Okay, if I understood your question correctly. Okay, so again, I'm only half teasing, because that really is an implication of the assumptions that you in this model in which we don't judge what people choose. Sort of, as long as you're not hurting anybody else, and blah blah. Let's acknowledge that we are, for now, sticking with this setup. We have individual preferences, and we're going to somehow aggregate them up into a social preference ranking, a social welfare function. I'm going to put this in quotes because I'm going to put, just in quotes, because that's kind of, all right, so now suppose that we did not want a random number, random number generator buying us, 1,000-meter statues at random places in the countryside of random historical figures. What are some of the things, if, imagine, so suppose that through, scanning our Google searches and the like, we've come up, we've got a ministry at the center that has figured out every individual's complete preference ranking. Okay, they know what you want. Google knows what I want better than I know what I want, I'm pretty sure. So we hire Google as a subcontractor to identify the individual preference rankings of everyone in Ukraine. And then we have some analysts who have the job of taking their individual rankings and adding them up into some sensible joint ranking. And because they took only the first week of this course, so they know there's a problem with using social cost benefit analysis, but then they left, and then they didn't learn anything else. So they know, their instructions are, we want to somehow add these up and create a social ranking that does a really good job. So it somehow does a really good job of capturing what individuals in society want, okay? And we're going to give them some instructions. So we say, no, we don't want a random number generator. What are some of the instructions we're going to give them for what are the features of this aggregation process that are going to map all of these individually to some social choice ranking that does a good job. What are the kinds of instructions? You're in charge of giving them instructions. What would you like them to do? How would they do that aggregation?
Can do mean or
a mean?
Or some aggregation. Can we just add every individual's preferences and have a total sum or mean of this sample? Okay, so that sounds sort of reasonable, I guess. So Ilya suggests somehow so W of X will be the sum of UN of X over all N. And maybe if we want to normalize, we'll divide by N to give the mean. Something like this. Okay? Is that, are we done? Does that seem, I mean, it sounds fair. Whatever the average person wants, or the average want is. Some people like lots of healthcare, and some people, they're stupid and they don't know that they'll ever need healthcare, so they put very low weight on it, and somehow we add them together in this way.
Average is very sensitive to outliers, so if we have a lot of outliers, and then our average will be skewed, to somehow.
Yeah, okay, so average is sensitive to outliers. Okay, so maybe we could have some other, statistical notion of central tendency like? Median. Like the median. We'll take the median person. Oh, that's another possibility. Maybe we should be sensitive to outliers. Maybe if some people really value healthcare a lot, our social ranking should attend to that.
We should use some weighting, maybe.
Some weighting?
I mean, if you have, a lot of population, some population group which really want to have drugs, and it's let's say they're
okay. The drug-consuming lobby.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the smaller part which would like to build highways and healthcare. Mm-hmm. But we need somehow to weight that depends on this number of population, I would say. So I would use some weighting inside.
Some weighting, okay. So, but hang on. Give me a little more. If you're weighting, you're saying some people weigh more than others. That's what weighting things means.
Yes.
All right, so I've got a great idea. I've got a great idea for how we do the weighting. We weight me 100% and all of you 0. I think I like the way you're thinking about this. This really works.
Is it still democracy?
Sure, I'll vote for it. It's actually, okay, less snarky answer to the question, is it still democracy? We are saying nothing about voting mechanisms. You're saying nothing about democracy. We're going somehow from individuals, how they would choose, to a choice for society. We've said nothing about any, in fact, we're explicitly not doing voting. We do not vote for anything. We have technocrats who understand us and create some aggregate, what is good for us function. There's no voting here.
But we should somehow normalize, like, I don't know, data.
Normalize the data?
Yes, but I mean...
What data? Weather data?
We have a lot of, like, I don't know, elder population, like
Yes.
80% of data, and the last, like, and the other part is just, like, I don't know...
Maybe Ali means unprotected types of population, so we need to wait.
We have more vulnerable, you might say, populations, and we should be grant more concern to their needs and interests. Is that?
Yes, somehow.
Yeah. Somehow?
But we really need to know this, like, what data we have, like, I don't know, which population groups, or like what age or something, so we need to...
Okay, so first I've told you we have an absurdly unrealistic set of data in that we know for every individual their preference rankings. Already very unrealistic, but suppose we've got that. Now you're saying that some of the individuals in our community, we, for some reasons, consider their needs and concerns have or should have greater weight than the needs and concerns of others. Yeah? Okay. That's the, and for example,
Elder population, yes.
what?
Elder population.
Elder population, right. Or, okay, I'm going to get it. Ilya, no, who had his, Pini had his hand up first. I'm sorry, Ilya, you have to wait.
Okay, I don't want to confuse the context again, but the reason you said it's very highly unrealistic data. But in the context of voting in democracy, when you have 70% of people voting, and you have a clear set of preferences of choices, 2 or 3 candidates, then you have that information. And if you have certain voting procedures like ranked choice voting, you may want to talk about it. Then you have more information about their preference rankings. That information is being collected by collecting the votes. So what I'm saying is, in some limited contexts, but important contexts, that data is available.
You are correct. You have confused the issue because, it's an appropriate point, but again, we are not voting here. We're asking for first off, we're not voting, we're asking for a mapping of everyone's individual preference rankings to a social preference ranking. Now, and implicitly, what you're saying is that in this case, we didn't really, you're supposing an aggregation mechanism that doesn't really make use of most of this information, because when we see the votes of people, we don't know why they voted. What we see is, like, it could be, a lot of people said, why did you vote for George W. Bush? He seemed like he'd be a nice guy to have a beer with. You don't, or it could be that they value the policies, or it could be they've got some other reason. They always vote one party, whatever. We're not using their individual preference rankings fully when we're dealing with voting. Let's hold off on the voting. Let's hold off on the voting. Ilya.
What about if we multiply by some weight coefficients this axis, this preferences, not groups of people, this, for example, elderly people and children. My idea is that, for example, we have three axes: health, highways, and heroin. Heroin, yes. Heroin we will multiply by 0. We think health is very important, so we will multiply it by 2. And highways is not such a very high priority for us, and we will multiply that value for 0.7.
Okay, just a moment. I'm going to couple things. So to implement Alexandra's program, right now you could say where is my... Let's call it Ilya's original program, calling for averages, had us weight every individual with an equal weight 1/n, just their equal share in the population. You're suggesting we could generalize this by having some, since it's Alexandra's program is a generalization of Ilya's program, and since it's your program, I'm going to give you the honor of choosing the notation that we will use for assigning the weights.
Notation, but what should I write?
This is great. Okay, well, let's say little wn. Okay, so each individual has, some of them, in principle, this could be all of the members in the elder community get a little extra weight, and others a little, correspondingly a little less. Okay, so that's weighting the individuals, and now you are giving a different version of this in which we somehow adjust this according to, we bend this in some way according to which things we think are better. Let me ask first, there's a heavy use of a particular word in your last suggestion, which is the word we. Who is the we doing this adjusting? Who is the we that is deciding to assign a weight of 0 to heroin? And on what basis are they doing that when we, the people, demand heroin? Who is this higher level of we?
No, we are ministers.
We are the ministers. Well, there's a minister of heroin who says, I'm a minister too. Okay. The point is that all of these are admissible. We just have to have some way of adding things up, and there could be, but any way you do this is effectively imposing some kind of value judgments. There is effectively some higher level we that is whose views are being imposed somehow when you do this. Well, let me give you, I'd like to suggest a few instructions that we might give to these technocrats that seem reasonable. And we're going to give them what seem like a very mild and minimal list of instructions. Okay, I can erase this, it's okay? some very mild requirements. So think of these requirements for W. So think of these as we're trying to avoid that 1,000-meter statue in the countryside of a random historical figure. I don't know, Mickey Mouse, that's pretty cool. You could see it from far away. You could say, okay, you get to Mickey Mouse, you take a left. I don't know, I like it. And if everyone prefers XA to XB, then what? If every individual prefers XA to XB, then what?
We will choose XA.
Then society should prefer XA. Then W. Okay, that seems like if we're not even getting that right, then we've really gone off the rails. We're doing a very poor job indeed, yes? So it should preserve the rankings of individuals in case where there is unanimity. So in other words, if you might say there, if this is true, then a movement, we introduced a related term a few classes ago. If we move from XA to XB, then this is a Pareto improvement. All right, so it should preserve, so it should, the jargon term is Pareto, the social aggregation function is Pareto efficient, meaning it preserves, aligns with Pareto improvements. If it makes, or more generally, and this could be weakly preferred, so in UNXA greater than or equal to weakly, at least weakly preferred, for all n implies W is at least weakly preferred socially. That seems pretty, okay? As long as we're, this is actually, I'll just put it, this actually, I sort of built this in from the beginning, but W's domain is X. That is, we're not going to come up with is the whole domain. We're not going to come up with a ranking just by kind of making our problem simpler and only dealing with a subset of the world. Independence of irrelevant alternatives. So Penny introduced this yesterday. So, and we got the hint that there's actually more to this than meets the eye. So the idea, though, is that if, so here's, you go to a restaurant and you say, I'd like some soup. and they say, well, whoa, okay, not very nice. We have 3 kinds of soup today. We have the chicken, the vegetable, and the borscht. Okay? And you say, oh, that sounds very good. I would like the borscht. Okay? They say, okay, they take down your order, and then they come back a minute later and they say, I'm very sorry. It turns out that we are out of the chicken soup. Do you still want the borscht?
Yes.
Are you sure? The menu has changed.
It's irrelevant.
Right, so we assume, so this seems like a salient feature of your individual decision-making, that it would be weird if they came back and they say, oh no, you're out of the chicken soup. No, then I don't want the borscht anymore. I definitely want the vegetable soup in this case. Okay, that would be unusual. There could be, weird reasons maybe, like Penny noted an example. Suppose you know the cook that makes the borscht, who makes the really good borscht, is also the one that makes the chicken soup. And if there's no borscht, that means that cook is off tonight. And therefore, you actually decide, no, the vegetable soup is what the substitute cook makes, and that's really better on this night. So somehow the menu of options gives you information that implicitly. So these are more like exotic or constructed or fancier situations. But before we get any questions, so everyone understands both what independence of irrelevant alternatives is and why, for, let's say, normal kinds of individual preference rankings, individual choices, this seems like they would be reasonable. And if we're making a preference ranking for society, that is, if we're kind of constructing the social individual with its aggregated preferences, and we wanted to choose the way an individual chooses, they'd be the same. Like they would say, if we're out of chicken soup, it doesn't affect that I want borscht above all. Everyone gets that? Okay.
So, very, very quick comment. You may think this is weird situation, but regardless of that, representing this in the context of decision theory is not that difficult. We have probabilities, we have values, and we know that the probabilities may depend on the options. So there is a way to represent situations like this in a decision matrix. It's not like, some magic that you cannot talk about. It's not like poetry. Technically, you can represent it in the decision matrix. The problem is that these assumptions hide other assumptions about the structure of the decision makers and the relationship between probabilities and things like that. So I just want to say, it's weird, but it's not like a big mystery.
Yeah. Technically, in terms of implementing this in formalism, it's not that weird. So this makes sense if we're thinking about individual choices, but now imagine voting. Okay, you have a different kind of voting system in Ukraine than we do in the US, but imagine you've got, there's a famously or infamously, in the election for US president in 2000, there were 2 major candidates, George Bush and Al Gore, and there was a 3rd party candidate, Ralph Nader, who's running on the Green Party. Okay? So imagine, if you're choosing between, let's say, first we have an individual choice. We're choosing between 3, we're going to get a nice jacket, and we can get it in blue, green, and yellow, and Katerina chooses blue. The fact that yellow is not available makes no influence. She still chooses blue. But now suppose we're talking about voting, and there are three candidates, blue, green, and Nader. If Nader is on the ballot, then this pulls enough votes away from green that blue actually wins. But if blue and green are the only candidates, then green wins. In other words, dropping this option from the voting menu, the list of candidates, ends up flipping you to a different preferred option. So voting, if you're voting in this way, and in many different kinds of voting systems, independence of irrelevant alternatives does not hold. There's an interaction between the options on the menu that affects the outcomes in a way that does not happen if you're just ranking individual preferences. So that is a strong signal of a couple things. One, there's something different about society making choices than individuals making choices. That somehow when you're aggregating and interacting between people, there's richer kinds of things that are going on that are real that would be just weird or silly or nonsensical in the case of a single individual. And second, that the particular rules of voting, if you're using voting, the particular rules of voting matter in how, because voting is, as Pini indicated, another mechanism for aggregating individual preferences to a social choice. Okay, so let us suppose, though, that for this, we're looking for essentially we're looking for a wise person, not a person, but a wise agent. This wise agent will algorithmically vacuum up all of our individual preference information and will wisely choose for us. And we'll do so in a way that checks off these boxes. And there's one other thing. We're not going to worry much about weighting, the vulnerable, the poor, the tired, the hungry. We're going to allow some weighting. But we are not going to. We're going to have just a very, very weak nod in the direction of democracy and inclusion, which is we'll call it non-dictatorship. There will not be a single agent who always wins. Like one way to have a social choice function is you have a king. The king decides. And if the king wants 1,000-foot or a 1,000-meter statue, perhaps of his glorious self, then that's what's good for society. No, so we will not allow that. Non-dictatorship.
Or it could be a citizen. None of the members can be a dictator.
None of the 1 through N's. Whoever that is, whoever we are thinking about, none of them can be, their preferences cannot be the only ones that matter, okay? And I won't bother with formalism because we're running low on time, okay? So these seem, I would submit, we're going to give our technocrats down in the center these instructions. We want you, we don't want to bother with voting. We don't want to bother with lots of things. What we want is a benevolent, some benevolent agent to choose for us in a way that respects what we individually want at least this much. This is, and And so why don't you work on that and give us some options that meet these criteria, and then we'll think about it. Okay? Does that seem like I submit that seems a pretty minimal, very reasonable set of instructions to give them. So I'll understand the exercise? All right? And guess what? Errors and possibility theorem states there is no such function. You cannot have it. That if you have this, this, and this, then you have the preferences, then there is an individual in society who's essentially the dictator. Their preferences are the ones that dictate. The only way that you can have a social welfare function that satisfies what seem like these really simple, really minimal, weak criteria is to pick somebody and say, congratulations, you're in charge. Does not exist a W that satisfies and we'll call these 1, 2, and 4. Well, that's a bummer, huh? To use an American phrase. Bummer, is that a? Yes. Yes, you know that, okay. So this whole program, this whole project of coming up with a social welfare function that aggregates in some clever but sensible way our individual preferences to create an agent that will decide for us, this whole program is cannot be implemented. So this idea that we can make good social choices without having to ever bother with talking with one another, turns out, what a shame. We actually have to talk to one another, or we have to somehow, no, it's not quite true, we have to talk with one another, but the idea that we could just construct this social agent that acts on our behalf in this reasonable way cannot be done. All right? So what do we do then? Well, by the way, and this also, by an implication of this, what does this tell us about social cost-benefit analysis? As this thing we've been talking about. It tells us this says there is no welfare ranking that does this, and therefore, in particular, the one that we've been talking about all last week does not do this either. Now before we move on, I did want to go back to Ilya's program as refined by Alexandra. The suggestion there was, well, we know as a consequence of Errors and Possibility Theorem that it does not satisfy all of these jointly together. But let's suppose we define Wn x for some weights So this is just saying it's a vector of weights, so positive numbers or positive and zero numbers. So there's actually a more fundamental problem with this proposal. Maybe anybody online see the most fundamental problem with this proposal? Are there any questions online, by the way? No. Nobody sees something even more fundamentally wrong? Okay, here's what's fundamentally wrong. A utility function is kind of not really a function. That is sort of, I mean, it is, but preferences are ordinal, not cardinal. When you say, I prefer 3 bananas to 2 bananas, there's no well-defined sense in which we say how much more I prefer. It doesn't mean that I prefer 3 bananas 50% more than 2 bananas. That has no meaning. It's a ranking. It doesn't have a quantity associated with it. So if I take the utility function for person number 1 here, and I do any kind of stretching or expanding or contraction, so I maintain the same preference ranking. It contains the same information about their preferences and therefore it's not, this notion of utility as something that, here we're talking about adding together utilities of different people. We can't really do that. Right, this requires us to make interpersonal utility comparisons. We are implicitly saying that we're adding your utility to yours, to yours, and that's not what we're up to. That's cheating. That's not what the formalism gives us. So that's the more, independent of how else you do your weighting. I mean, you get the point, right? So therefore, what I'm saying is, this is a big This is not well defined. Or another way of putting it, if I multiplied anybody's individual utility score. Anyway, yeah, I won't belabor it. You get the point, right? Okay. So we've got to do. Something else. Any questions, comments at this point? No.
Again, I don't know if you want to get into this issue about democracy.
Well, we're getting there. That's what's coming next. But
can I comment?
Sure.
Okay, so I'd like to comment about how, at least I see this relates directly to the field of democracy. So in democracy we have voting. People express their choices, and the voting procedure is a way to aggregate their votes. Now, as Bettina said earlier, standard voting doesn't tell you, when you mark your choices, you don't really express your entire preference ranking. In many cases, you just say what's on top of your preference ranking. But there are voting procedures that can take input, in principle. Take as input your entire preference ranking. And we can ask what would be good properties of these voting procedures. These voting procedures are social aggregation mechanisms. So there is this idea that democracy has to be good and rational. It has to produce good results in the sense that, they're good for everyone in a fair way, more or less. And they have to be rational. They cannot be stupid. They cannot be dictatorial, or they cannot be inconsistent. So you can generalize errors well, it's actually a direct consequence that if you have a voting procedure in democracy that aggregates the full preference rankings of individuals, it cannot meet all these conditions. And in that sense, this theorem says that there is no such thing as good democracy. If it's good, it's not rational or it's not fair. It could be good if there is a dictator. Well, it could be rational. Sorry, it could be rational if there is a dictator. I'm saying that these conditions together are some form of rationality. But you want the outcome to be also good and fair to everyone, right? You want it to be really aggregated in a good way. So you can say that this theorem says that there cannot be a good and consistent rational democracy. And that seems absurd, right? I think it's absurd. So, but that's what it says. So we can now talk about, what is wrong with this? How do you refine it? Because we do want a theory of a good democracy. And I think there is a way to get there, but it's complicated.
Okay, yes, excellent. And I think to follow up, what is a way of what 1 through 4 you could say is asking is take all of our individual preferences and rationally aggregate them to a single rational decision maker preferences. And this says you cannot do that. You cannot create one rational social agent out of all the rational individual agents if you use this notion of democracy. So you have to relax something, either the rationality bit or fairness or something on here. Now, on the topic of fairness, let me say then, what we then look to going ahead are different ways of thinking about social choices that obviously cannot meet these criteria, but they meet some others. They do something else. So there's what are some of the themes that come up? We want some way of making social decisions, and it can't be this rational agent. It maybe could be some kind of voting. Maybe there are other kinds of ways of doing social choice. We also have noted, or I've stressed that in the background here, when we say we have preferences, that the individuals have preferences, we are buying into all of that model of the individual who has well-defined preferences and whatever the individual, and then we're making the normative claim that whatever the individual wants is good for them, and giving them more of what they want is a good thing for society to do, which is, it's combining both the model of human behavior and human equipment, that they have preferences and that's how they choose, and together with a normative claim that what they choose is good. Those are both things that merit hard look. Okay? And I think those are worth noting. Looking ahead, do people really have preferences in the sense that we've says, in the strong sense we've been describing? Complete, well-ordered, the whole domain, etc. And what do we think of the normative claim that people getting what they want, is socially good. Equating good with, and this really is, I mean, this is a definition. Social surplus is the good. It is the thing that we want more of. And social surplus is the realization of consumption net of some production costs. So these are the questions that we have been raised by our discussion so far. Elena?
Yes.
Yes, so this is the normative claims. These are claims involving value judgments and should claims. This is really a question about how we model, this is, you might say, a methodological question. How do we model humans and how they make choices in their behavior? And this is a question about, you could say, about justice, or about social values. Is it the job of social choice making to give people what they individually want? And if yes or if no, how in both of these then connect to the questions, then by what mechanisms do we make social choices? Okay. Now, any questions from the line? No. Okay. So on the topic of fairness, yes, we want fairness. We want our procedures to be fair, but what is fair can be hard to discern, actually, even hard to define. There are many different concepts of fairness. All of these seem like, these seem like they have something to do with fairness, and it turns out that trying to implement a social choice mechanism with these joint concepts of fairness, we hit a dead end. So, what is fair? Is fairness equality? Is it involve formal procedural equality? Everyone is treated the same in the processes of administration. Is it fair or does fairness have something? Do we treat everyone the same, or do we adjust how we treat them? Maybe weigh how we treat them according to their needs or their capabilities. There's a line. Well, let me tell you a story about fairness. So this is from our our teacher, Sidney Morgenbester, who's the philosopher at Columbia. So he we had the Vietnam War and in the US, and we had student protests at many universities, including on the campus at Columbia University. And one day, and at this time, Sidney Morgenbester was a young professor. Someone ran into the philosophy department building and said, the police are on campus and they are facing off against the student protesters, and it's very tense and it looks like there could be violence. And so the faculty said, oh, this is bad, what can we do? And they decided what they would do is, as faculty, they would put themselves in between the police and the students and form a buffer, and they would prevent violence. So, okay, yes, and they go down and they do this, and they put themselves in between the police and the students. Now, years later, Sydney was called to jury duty in New York. And so, you know, jury duty, how that works. You've maybe seen Law and Order. I don't know if you've, anyway, the point is you have 12 people who judge on a case. So he's...
In Ukraine,
jury don't? Okay, interesting. I want to come back to that. So he's in the part of the process where it's called the voir dire, which is literally French to see, to talk, to decide whether or not he's suitable for to be a juror in this case. And it turns out it's a police brutality case. And so the prosecuting attorney, or one of the attorneys, asks him, so have you ever had any interactions with the police that you found unpleasant or unfair? He said, well, there was one time, it was very unpleasant, but I would have to concede that it was fair. Well, what do you mean? Well, they hit me on the head, so it was unpleasant. But it was fair because they hit everybody else on the head too. And with that little lesson about the slippery notion of fairness, I'm going to wish you all a good day, wish you not get the wrong kind of fairness in your lives, and we shall see you tomorrow with a discussion of fairness in social choices.